Imagine discovering one of America's richest goldfield, then watching the entire nation forget it. That may sound impossible. After all, when most people think about American gold, the same names immediately come to mind. California, Nevada, Alaska, perhaps Colorado. Yet decades before, California's legendary gold rush transformed the American West. Another landscape had already begun quietly changing the history of gold mining. Not beneath towering mountains, not inside vast deserts, but beneath the rolling forests and gentle hills of South Carolina. At first glance, nothing about this landscape seems extraordinary. Quiet streams weave through hardwood forests, old farms stretch across gentle hills, weathered roads disappear into peaceful countryside. It feels like the last place anyone would expect to uncover one of America's earliest major gold discoveries. Yet appearances have always been deceiving her. Because beneath these quiet hills, the Earth has been protecting an extraordinary geological story for hundreds of millions of years, a story that many people believe ended long ago. Professional geologists quietly know otherwise. Even today, long after the first prospectors disappeared, long after forgotten mines filled with rainwater, long after history moved westward, scientists continue returning to these hills, not searching for another gold rush, but searching for answers. The remarkable question isn't whether South Carolina once produced gold. History has already answered that. The real mystery is, why does this forgotten goldfield continue attracting geological attention after nearly 2 centuries? That question takes us far deeper than old mine shafts. It takes us into the remarkable history written beneath the landscape itself. Before we begin, I'd love to know something. What time is it where you're watching this documentary? And which country are you joining us from today? Leave your answer in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where fellow explorers are watching from around the world. Now, let's travel back to a time before California became famous. A time when America's relationship with gold was only beginning, long before thousands of hopeful miners crossed deserts in search of fortune. South Carolina quietly experienced something remarkable. Small discoveries began appearing across the countryside. Nothing dramatic at first, a few unusual rocks, tiny flakes recovered from stream sediments, curious rumors passed between neighboring communities. Most people paid little attention until the discoveries became impossible to ignore. The quiet hills had begun revealing something extraordinary. Families who had lived on the land for generations suddenly found themselves standing above ground that held unexpected value. The landscape itself hadn't changed, only people's understanding of it had. Word spread slowly, unlike the explosive excitement that later defined California. South Carolina's gold story unfolded with surprising patience. Small mining operations appeared. Simple stamp mills echoed through valleys. Local communities slowly adapted to an industry few had imagined only years before. For a brief period, these peaceful hills became one of the most important centers of American gold production. Today, many people are surprised to learn that the southeastern United States experienced a significant gold mining era, decades before the famous discoveries farther west. History tends to remember the loudest stories. Geology often remembers the oldest ones. Then something unexpected happened. The country's attention shifted. California captured the imagination of an entire nation. Thousands left their homes chasing dreams across the continent. New discoveries continued farther west. Bigger mines opened, larger fortunes were made. Gradually, the quiet goldfields of South Carolina slipped into the background. Not because the geology disappeared, because public attention did. That difference matters. History forgot. The Earth never did. Even today, if you quietly walk through certain parts of South Carolina, you may pass abandoned foundations, collapsed mine entrances, weathered waste rock, and streams that once carried hopeful prospectors. Most visitors never notice them. The forest has become remarkably good at keeping old secrets, yet geologists often see something completely different. They don't simply see abandoned mines. They see unanswered questions, because every historic gold district contains something far more valuable than old excavations. It contains information. Information that modern geology continues studying in ways early miners could never have imagined. The first miners searched for visible gold. Modern geologists search for understanding. That shift has changed everything. Imagine standing beside an abandoned 19th century mine. The miners who once worked here had only simple tools. Their understanding of the Earth's interior was limited. If the gold disappeared, they often assumed the deposit had ended. Today's exploration teams ask a very different question. Did the gold actually disappear? Or did the miners simply reach the limit of the technology available at the time? That single question has reopened geological investigations across many historic mining districts around the world. South Carolina became one of them. Old maps, historic reports, forgotten production records, even handwritten notes preserved in archives, have become surprisingly valuable once again. Not because they reveal where gold is, but because they reveal how people once understood the landscape. Modern geology often begins by comparing those old observations with entirely new scientific interpretations. Sometimes, a note written nearly 200 years ago quietly becomes the missing piece of a geological puzzle. That is one of the most fascinating changes in modern exploration. The rocks haven't changed. Our ability to understand them has. This is exactly why experienced geologists become excited when revisiting forgotten districts. Not because they expect history to repeat itself, because history often leaves behind questions that newer science is finally capable of answering. South Carolina is one of those places. The deeper researchers looked, the more they realized something remarkable. The old mines were never the entire story. They were only the places 19th century miners could recognize. The geology beneath them continued far beyond what anyone at the time fully understood. That realization transformed the way modern scientists began looking at this forgotten goldfield. Suddenly, the question was no longer, where did miners find gold? It became, what kind of geological system created this entire landscape? And once that question was asked, South Carolina stopped looking like an old mining district. It began looking like one of the most fascinating geological stories in the eastern United States, because the real discovery wasn't hidden inside the abandoned mines. It was hidden inside the ancient rocks beneath them, and those rocks were about to reveal a story that had remained buried for hundreds of millions of years. Those ancient rocks were about to reveal something few people ever stopped to consider. Imagine standing in the middle of South Carolina's quiet countryside. Everything feels peaceful. Rolling hills, dense forests, small streams flowing almost unnoticed. Nothing about this landscape suggests it should contain one of America's oldest gold provinces. And that's exactly what fascinated modern geologists. Because landscapes like this usually don't preserve extraordinary geological stories. They erase them. Rain wears mountains away. Rivers carry rock toward the ocean. Entire mountain ranges slowly disappear over hundreds of millions of years. So why did South Carolina's gold survive? The answer surprised even many geologists. It wasn't because this region experienced more gold-forming events than the American West. It was because the Earth preserved part of its geological memory in a very unusual way. Long before the first dinosaur, long before the Atlantic Ocean even existed, this quiet corner of North America looked completely different. Instead of gentle hills, enormous volcanic islands rose from an ancient ocean. Powerful earthquakes constantly reshaped the landscape. Molten rock forced its way upward beneath the surface. Entire sections of the Earth's crust slowly collided. Imagine continents moving only a few centimeters each year, almost impossible to notice. Yet over millions of years, those tiny movements built mountains thousands of meters high. Today's peaceful forests were once part of one of the most violent geological environments the eastern United States had ever experienced. Remarkably, the evidence never completely disappeared. It simply became hidden beneath time. This ancient region is now known as the Carolina Slate Belt. Most people have never heard its name. Professional geologists almost certainly have, because stretching across parts of South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, the Carolina Slate Belt quietly preserves one of the oldest mineralized belts in eastern North America. At first glance, the name sounds rather ordinary, almost forgettable. Yet hidden inside these rocks are clues that continue influencing modern exploration today. One of the most fascinating discoveries wasn't the gold itself. It was the realization that the gold wasn't scattered randomly across the landscape. Instead, it appeared to follow surprisingly consistent geological patterns. Not patterns obvious to 19th century miners. Patterns only becoming clearer through decades of careful geological investigation. As more detailed studies continued, researchers noticed something remarkable. Many historic mines weren't isolated discoveries at all. They were connected, not underground by tunnels, but through ancient geological events that had shaped the entire region hundreds of millions of years earlier. Suddenly, small abandoned mines stopped looking like separate stories. They became individual chapters of one enormous geological system that changed everything. Instead of studying each mine independently, geologists began studying the entire belt as one connected landscape. The questions became much larger. Why did one section produce coarse gold, while another contained finer mineralization? Why did some districts remain surprisingly small, while others extended for remarkable distances? Why did certain historic workings abruptly end, only for modern studies to suggest the geological system continued far beyond them? Each answer revealed another mystery. Then another fascinating realization quietly emerged. Many early prospectors focused almost entirely on what they could see. Visible quartz, visible gold, visible mineralization. Modern exploration often begins somewhere completely different. It begins with patterns too large to recognize while standing on the ground. Imagine viewing the Carolina Slate Belt from hundreds of kilometers above. Mountain ridges suddenly align. Ancient volcanic sequences begin appearing. Long geological trends stretch across entire states. What once looked like isolated hills suddenly become pieces of an enormous geological puzzle. Perspective changes everything. This is one reason forgotten districts sometimes return to scientific attention. The rocks never changed, only our ability to connect them did. Then another question quietly appeared. If South Carolina's geology is so remarkable, why wasn't every part of the belt mined? The answer is surprisingly simple. Early miners searched where the evidence was obvious. Modern geologists investigate where the geological story continues. Those are not always the same places. Technology certainly helped, but technology alone never solved the mystery. Understanding did. Every generation of geologists inherited more information than the last. Old maps became more accurate. Rock ages became better understood. Regional geological models became clearer. One discovery strengthened another. Slowly, the forgotten Goldfield stopped looking forgotten at all. It simply hadn't been fully understood. Perhaps that's the greatest difference between historic prospecting and modern geology. Historic miners asked, "Where is the gold?" Modern geologists ask, "What kind of earth created this gold?" That single change in thinking often leads to discoveries impossible to imagine using 19th century methods alone. And South Carolina quietly became one of the finest classrooms for asking exactly that question. Because once geologists understood the history beneath these hills, they began recognizing something else. The rocks weren't merely preserving ancient gold. They were preserving an ancient geological process, one capable of teaching lessons that extended far beyond South Carolina itself. Lessons that exploration teams now apply to forgotten gold districts across the world. And remarkably, some of those lessons began with details so small that generations of miners had simply walked past them without ever realizing their true significance. Those tiny geological details quietly became the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Imagine walking through one of South Carolina's abandoned mining districts today. The old stamp mills are silent. Wooden structures have long since disappeared. Nature has reclaimed nearly everything. At first, It feels as though history has come to an end. Yet for modern exploration, geologists, the story is only beginning, because abandoned mines rarely represent the end of a geological system. More often, they represent the limits of what earlier generations were able to understand. That single idea has transformed mineral exploration across the world. Today, exploration companies no longer begin by asking where miners found gold. They begin by asking something much more interesting. What did those miners never have the chance to see? That question changed South Carolina forever. Imagine being handed a handwritten mining report from the early 1800s. Several pages, simple sketches, brief descriptions, perhaps a few production records. To an ordinary reader, it looks like history. To a modern geologist, it becomes a remarkable source of geological evidence. Not because every note is accurate, but because every observation was made before decades of mining changed the landscape. Sometimes, those forgotten reports describe rock exposures that no longer exist, old creek channels that have since disappeared, outcrops now hidden beneath vegetation, mine workings that later collapsed. History quietly preserves landscapes that modern explorers can no longer see. Then, something fascinating happens. Modern geological mapping, satellite imagery, topographic analysis, and historical records are carefully compared. One begins confirming another. Slowly, the forgotten landscape begins rebuilding itself, almost like assembling a giant puzzle whose pieces have been scattered across 2 centuries. Then, a remarkable pattern begins emerging. Many historic workings weren't positioned randomly. Neither were the streams, neither were the ridges, neither were the old settlements. Everything reflected the landscape that existed at that particular moment in history. Understanding that ancient landscape often explains decisions that seem mysterious today. Perhaps an old mine appears strangely isolated, until geological reconstruction reveals it once stood beside an entirely different drainage system. Perhaps another operation seems surprisingly small, until historic records reveal it was never intended to become a large mine at all. Every forgotten detail quietly changes the story. Then comes one of the greatest lessons South Carolina offers modern prospectors. Goldfields don't become exhausted simply because people stop mining them. Sometimes, economics changes, technology changes, ownership changes, priorities change. Meanwhile, the geology patiently remains exactly where it has always been. That simple truth explains why exploration companies continue revisiting districts many people assume have already revealed everything they contain. Not because they expect history to repeat itself, because science continues evolving. Questions that couldn't be answered 50 years ago sometimes become surprisingly straightforward today. Then another realization quietly appears. Many people imagine geologists searching for gold. Professional geologists often describe their work differently. They're searching for understanding. Gold simply happens to be part of that understanding. The distinction matters, because once you begin understanding why one district formed, you begin recognizing similar geological stories elsewhere. Not identical, but related. South Carolina becomes more than a destination, it becomes a geological teacher. Its lessons quietly travel far beyond the southeastern United States. They influence exploration in Canada, Australia, Finland, Brazil, West Africa, and countless other mineral provinces where ancient geological histories share surprising similarities. That is perhaps the greatest compliment a goldfield can receive. Not that it produced remarkable amounts of gold, but that it helped scientists understand how entirely different discoveries might one day be made. Imagine standing once more on those quiet South Carolina hills. The forests sway gently in the afternoon breeze. Small streams continue carving their way through the valleys. Birdsong fills the air. Nothing about the landscape demands attention. Yet beneath your feet lies a geological story nearly 500 million years in the making. Generations of miners uncovered only part of it. Generations of geologists continue learning from the rest. Perhaps that is why forgotten goldfields are never truly forgotten, only misunderstood. Every abandoned shaft, every weathered rock pile, every forgotten report stored inside an archive. still has another story waiting to be told. And South Carolina reminds us of something remarkably important. The greatest discoveries are not always made by finding new places. Sometimes, they come from seeing familiar places through entirely new eyes. Because the Earth has never stopped writing its story. It simply waits for someone curious enough to read the next chapter. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of America's most overlooked goldfields. If this documentary changed the way you think about forgotten mining districts, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What forgotten goldfield should we uncover next? Until our next expedition, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, the world's greatest geological discoveries often begin in the places history quietly left behind.
Down from the hill, I'm back at this shaft.